They said no one had ever returned from here. Ethan Walker's voice was barely more than a whisper, swallowed instantly by the howling plasma storm that tore across the jagged cliffs of the forbidden planet, red lightning cracking overhead like the sky itself was tearing apart. His boots sank into the coarse, glassy sand, each step a cautious negotiation with the alien terrain, and he could feel the low hum of buried machinery vibrating through the ground beneath him, a pulse that seemed almost alive, warning him with every tremor. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like iron and ozone, and each breath made his chest ache. Yet he could not stop moving, curiosity propelling him forward along the narrow canyon, where walls of shimmering crystal rose high above, catching the storm's glow and fracturing it into dancing ribbons of light, painting his path in violent, shifting colors. Ethan paused, hand pressed against a jagged shard jutting from the canyon floor, feeling the chill through his glove as he studied the markings etched along its edge, symbols that seemed both ancient and impossibly intricate, and he traced them with trembling fingers, heart racing, mind spinning with questions no one had ever asked. From the corner of his eye, a faint movement, a glimmer, drew him toward a deeper shadow, and there she appeared, Lyra Vale, her form radiant, almost ethereal, iridescent hues sliding across her skin as if the storm itself were woven into her body, eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on him with a mixture of suspicion and wariness, each glance holding a story he had not yet begun to understand. The wind whipped around them, carrying sharp grains of sand that stung exposed skin, and Ethan raised a hand instinctively to shield his face, noticing how her gaze softened just enough to register curiosity, a mirror of his own, and he realized that this was no ordinary encounter. Every motion, every breath carried the weight of discovery, the thrill of the unknown pressing against their ribs like gravity. He adjusted the small scanner in his pack, light flickering across the terrain, revealing hollows and ridges that hinted at secrets buried beneath the planet's surface, and he could almost hear the echoes of past travelers in the sigh of the wind, ghosts urging him forward or perhaps warning him back. Lyra took a slow step closer, careful, deliberate, her presence both a challenge and an invitation, and the canyon seemed to narrow around them, the storm's howl dimming just enough to hear the subtle rhythm of their synchronized breathing, the pulse of fear and wonder intertwining, setting the stage for revelations that neither could yet imagine, as every shimmer of crystal and flash of plasma drew them deeper into a narrative written in the language of survival, trust, and the unspoken. Promised that curiosity, no matter how dangerous, was worth the step into the unknown. The canyon walls shimmered with fractured light as Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale moved cautiously along the twisting path, each step revealing new textures in the alien rock, jagged ridges sparkling with crystalline veins that hummed faintly under his fingertips, and Ethan could feel the pulse of the planet beneath him, a subtle vibration that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat, drawing him forward. Lyra's eyes scanned the horizon constantly, reflecting a mix of caution and wonder, and her presence radiated a quiet intensity that made Ethan acutely aware of his own vulnerability and determination. The air smelled sharp, metallic, and slightly sweet, carrying distant echoes of unseen waterfalls that shimmered with light too bright to touch, and every gust of wind lifted motes of luminescent dust that danced between them, tracing invisible patterns across the space they occupied. Ethan paused to adjust a small sensor on his backpack, the device casting a soft blue glow on his face, highlighting the sweat that traced clean lines along his temples, while Lyra tilted her head, studying the readings with curiosity, her expression flickering between comprehension and restrained skepticism, as if she were weighing every possibility before allowing herself to acknowledge the human who had dared to accompany her this far. He reached out to trace a symbol carved into the crystalline wall, the edges smooth and worn by unknown forces over untold eons, and Lyra crouched beside him, her hands hovering just above the surface without touching, eyes scanning the intricate pattern as if searching for hidden meaning, the silence between them filled only by the distant hum and the rhythmic crash of energy against stone. A narrow ledge led them to a pool of liquid that glowed faintly beneath a canopy of jagged rock, and Ethan crouched to examine the surface, watching tiny currents ripple through colors that seemed impossible. While Lyra leaned close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, the tension of proximity creating an unspoken connection that was neither intrusive nor casual, but charged with the mutual recognition of exploration and trust. Every shadow cast by the shifting storm seemed alive, morphing and twisting in ways that made the canyon feel simultaneously intimate and infinite, and Ethan felt a surge of exhilaration tempered by the awareness that any misstep could leave him stranded or lost in the labyrinthine paths ahead. Lyra finally spoke, her voice low but resonant, asking a question that hung in the charged air like a thread waiting to be pulled, and Ethan responded not with words, but by gently repositioning a sensor and pointing toward an unseen energy signature, his gesture an act of communication that transcended language. And for a brief moment, the storm seemed to pause, the colors and hum aligning around their shared focus, a quiet confirmation that they were in this together. The canyon stretched ahead, a twisting maze of light and shadow, and as they stepped forward, Ethan sensed that every pulse, every shimmer of crystal, every breath carried a story waiting to unfold, and the anticipation built with every careful stride, the mystery of the forbidden planet pressing close, inviting and demanding that they continue. The unspoken promise of discovery and understanding binding them in a rhythm neither could resist. The canyon gradually widened, revealing a plateau bathed in pale luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Ethan Walker's quickening heartbeat, and he moved forward with deliberate care, every step measured against the uneven ground scattered with crystalline shards that hummed faintly. Under his touch, while Lyra Vale floated slightly above the surface, her iridescent form catching the soft glow and casting refracted patterns that danced across the jagged terrain. Ethan paused at the edge of a shallow chasm, peering down into the depths where pools of glowing liquid reflected shapes that were almost familiar yet completely alien, and he could hear the subtle shift of wind threading through unseen channels, carrying whispers that hinted at histories buried beneath centuries of silence. Lyra tilted her head, eyes narrowing as she scanned the plateau, a flicker of both recognition and caution crossing her features, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment, the anticipation of uncovering what lay hidden pressing against his ribs with every breath. He adjusted a device strapped to his arm, the screen flickering as it mapped energies invisible to the naked eye, and Lyra stepped closer, her fingers brushing a floating fragment of crystal that responded to her touch with a shimmer of light, sending intricate reflections onto the jagged walls around them, weaving a pattern that seemed to speak in a language neither fully understood but both instinctively felt. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint scent reminiscent of ozone and the sharp tang of metallic minerals, and Ethan could feel the subtle vibration of the ground beneath his boots, a steady hum that seemed to guide him, as if the planet itself was aware of their presence and curious about their intent. A low ridge of translucent stone curved ahead, and through it, he glimpsed an archway carved from living crystal, shimmering with a soft internal glow that revealed shapes and symbols that might have been warnings or invitations, and Lyra moved with quiet grace, guiding him toward it, her expression unreadable but her presence reassuring in a way that transcended words. Ethan's breath caught as he stepped under the arch, the light refracting in a way that made it feel as though they were entering a space outside of time, a place where history and possibility converged in a single, shimmering moment, and he realized that every step, every shared glance, every subtle motion between them was part of a delicate dance of understanding and trust. They reached the center of the plateau, where a small rise of crystal and stone reflected the ambient glow like a beacon, and Ethan knelt to inspect markings that seemed to respond to his touch, pulses of light radiating outward and intertwining with Lyra's own presence, creating a visual rhythm that spoke to connection, discovery, and the silent acknowledgement of shared courage. The plateau stretched endlessly before them, shadows twisting and refracting with the light, and as they exchanged a glance, it carried the weight of unspoken questions and uncharted possibilities, a quiet promise that the journey deeper into the forbidden planet would reveal truths neither could yet imagine, the sense of wonder and tension binding them together as the plateau seemed to breathe and wait, patient and eternal. for the next step in their exploration. The plateau stretched before Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale, shimmering under the pale luminescence that bathed every jagged edge in surreal colors. And Ethan adjusted the sensor on his pack, the readout flickering as it traced invisible currents of energy threading through the crystalline terrain, guiding them forward. Lyra moved with cautious precision, her feet barely touching the uneven surface, iridescent skin catching every refraction of light, and her eyes scanned the plateau as if she were reading the pulse of the planet itself. A subtle vibration hummed beneath Ethan's boots, a rhythmic beat that seemed almost communicative, and he followed it instinctively, each step revealing new textures in the alien rock, delicate veins of crystal that hummed faintly under his fingertips, a language of light and resonance that neither words nor thought could fully capture. They reached a shallow basin where glowing liquid pooled quietly, reflecting fractured light in rippling patterns that seemed to dance with the rhythm of the planet, and Ethan knelt to observe, fascinated by currents that shimmered with impossible hues, while Lyra floated beside him, her gaze lingering on the ripples as though decoding some silent message. The air carried a faint metallic tang mingled with the crisp scent of mineral-rich water, and tiny motes of light floated lazily, catching the glow and creating ephemeral constellations between them. Ethan pointed to subtle changes in the currents, signaling a shift in the energy signature, and Lyra nodded in acknowledgement, moving closer to study the phenomenon more directly, her presence radiating a quiet intensity that made the plateau feel both intimate and immense. Shadows stretched long under the undulating glow, forming intricate patterns that twisted with the contours of the crystalline formations, and each reflection seemed to hint at histories buried deep within the planet, waiting to reveal themselves to those who could observe patiently. Ethan adjusted the scanner again, noting a faint rise in energy ahead, a cluster of crystalline spires that pulsed in synchrony, and Lyra guided him toward it with a subtle gesture, her eyes fixed on the light patterns, interpreting a logic that felt simultaneously alien and familiar. As they moved, the wind carried whispers of subtle vibrations, low and melodic, resonating with their steps, and Ethan felt an almost tactile connection with the environment, a sense that the planet was alive in ways beyond his understanding, responding to presence and intention alike. The spires drew nearer, revealing carved channels and patterns that refracted light into prismatic cascades across their path, and Lyra paused, placing a hand above one of the channels, her fingers hovering as the glow intensified, reacting to proximity without contact, a delicate interplay of energy and awareness. Ethan mirrored her careful movements, sensing the pulse in the crystal under his touch, each beat aligned with the hum of the ground beneath them, and together, they shared a moment of silent comprehension, the plateau stretching around them as a canvas of light, energy, and unspoken connection, anticipation building with every step as the mysteries of the forbidden planet beckoned them onward. The crystalline spires ahead pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm, casting prismatic reflections across the plateau as Ethan Walker advanced carefully, each footstep measured against the uneven ground and the subtle vibrations resonating beneath his boots, and Lyra Vale glided beside him, her iridescent form catching and scattering light in patterns that danced like living constellations, the subtle motion of her presence harmonizing with the planet's pulse. Ethan raised the small sensor on his backpack, letting the soft blue glow illuminate the carved channels in the spires, each groove and etching resonating with energy that shifted under his touch, and Lyra tilted her head, eyes narrowing in focus as she traced the arcs of light with delicate precision, guiding his understanding without speaking. A gentle wind stirred across the plateau, carrying luminous dust motes that swirled in the beams of refracted light, forming fleeting constellations that seemed to chart paths across the crystalline surface, and Ethan felt a shiver of exhilaration at the quiet dialogue between light and matter, a language beyond human words. He crouched to touch one of the larger spires, fingertips brushing the surface where faint pulses of energy traveled like ripples across water, and Lyra mirrored his movements, her hand hovering just above his own, as if acknowledging the connection without breaking the delicate rhythm. The air smelled of mineral and faint ozone, crisp and clean, sharpening every sound, every subtle vibration, and Ethan could hear the faint hum of energy traveling through the spires, a chorus of motion and resonance that seemed almost sentient, guiding them deeper into the mysteries of the plateau. Shadows stretched long and fractured across the ground as the light shifted, creating intricate geometric patterns that moved with the undulating pulses, and each reflection seemed to carry fragments of the planet's history, a narrative written in light, sound, and the silent understanding between two explorers. Ethan adjusted the sensor to track the energy flows, the readings flickering with shifting intensities, and Lyra leaned closer, her gaze following the patterns with unspoken focus, conveying both curiosity and careful caution. They moved in synchrony, following the rise and fall of energy currents, each step a dialogue with the planet, a delicate negotiation between presence and observation, and the anticipation of discovery built steadily, the plateau itself seeming to breathe around them, patient and eternal, waiting for them to interpret its secrets. The pools of glowing liquid along the path shimmered with subtle movement, reflecting their mirrored forms and the intricate glow of the spires, creating a visual rhythm that spoke to connection, discovery, and trust. And as Ethan traced a new channel of energy with his fingers, Lyra's eyes reflected understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared journey and the promise of revelations yet to come. The plateau alive with silent anticipation, drawing them deeper into its secrets with every step. The energy currents of the crystalline spires shifted subtly as Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale navigated the plateau, the soft hum beneath their feet vibrating in harmony with their synchronized movements, and every flicker of refracted light revealed new intricacies in the alien patterns that etched themselves across the jagged surfaces. Ethan's gaze followed the subtle pulses in the channels, tracing the flow of energy with careful precision, while Lyra floated beside him, her iridescent form catching every hue and casting dancing reflections onto the ground, her eyes observing the interactions between light, motion, and resonance with measured curiosity. A gentle breeze carried particles of luminescent dust, twisting and curling in the air like living threads, and Ethan reached out to let his fingers glide through them, the sensation almost tangible, a whisper of the planet's unspoken language, while Lyra mirrored his gesture, hands hovering with exacting grace, creating a visual rhythm of motion that resonated between them. The scent of minerals and faint ozone lingered in the air, sharp and invigorating, and Ethan could feel the vibration of the plateau beneath his boots, subtle yet insistent, a guide through the undulating landscape of crystal and stone. They approached a series of interconnected pools, their surfaces glowing with a soft internal light, and Ethan knelt to observe the ripples as they interacted with the reflections of the spires, while Lyra traced the edges, with careful movements, eliciting pulses of energy that responded to touch without contact, a delicate interplay of presence and observation. The shifting shadows of the spires stretched across the plateau, refracting and bending in response to the ambient glow, creating patterns that hinted at history and meaning, and Ethan felt the quiet weight of discovery pressing around them, a sense that every pulse, every shimmer, every subtle vibration was a message waiting to be interpreted. He adjusted his device to capture the shifting intensities of energy, while Lyra's gaze remained fixed on the channels, eyes tracking the flow of currents with a fluid intelligence, communicating without words the importance of patience and attention. They moved deeper into the plateau, guided by the subtle interplay of light and resonance, and Ethan realized that the environment itself seemed aware of their presence, responding to careful observation and gentle interaction, drawing them forward with an almost sentient patience. Each step brought new revelations, the interplay of crystal, light, and energy forming a silent narrative of the planet's ancient rhythms, and Ethan sensed a growing connection between them, a shared understanding that discovery was both the path and the reward, the plateau alive around them, guiding their progress with quiet insistence and unspoken promise. The plateau narrowed as Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale moved carefully along the winding crystalline ridges, each step deliberate, balancing on the uneven surfaces that glimmered under the faint luminescence of the alien energy currents, and Ethan could feel the subtle vibrations of the ground beneath his boots, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to respond to their presence, guiding them forward. Lyra floated slightly above the surface, her iridescent form refracting light in shifting hues, casting intricate patterns across the crystalline walls, and her eyes scanned the environment with a quiet intensity, alert yet trusting of the human who had followed her this far. Ethan knelt briefly beside a narrow channel etched into the crystal, fingertips brushing the grooves, feeling the energy pulse beneath the surface. And Lyra mirrored his careful movements, hovering close enough to observe, her hands moving in precise gestures that seemed to interact with the light and energy, creating a silent dialogue between them. The air carried a faint tang of minerals and ozone, crisp and invigorating, and tiny particles of luminescent dust swirled around them, catching the refracted glow of the spires to form ephemeral constellations that floated between their movements, emphasizing the vastness and intricacy of the plateau. Ethan adjusted the small sensor on his arm, watching as readings fluctuated with the intensity of energy currents, while Lyra leaned toward him, eyes following the flow, the subtle interaction conveying understanding without words, a communication of focus and shared intent. The wind shifted gently, carrying distant echoes of resonant hums that emanated from the crystalline structures, and Ethan felt a growing sense of connection with the planet, a quiet recognition that their careful observations were being acknowledged by the environment itself. They approached a deeper chasm where pools of glowing liquid reflected the spires above in ever-changing patterns, and Ethan crouched to trace a subtle current with his hand, the surface rippling under his touch without disturbance, while Lyra extended her hand above it, eliciting a matching shimmer that mirrored his movement, their silent coordination reinforcing trust and focus. Shadows twisted and lengthened as the energy fluctuated, creating dynamic patterns across the plateau, and every reflection seemed to carry fragments of stories long buried, hints of histories that neither could fully interpret but both could sense. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the anticipation building, the knowledge that every step forward might reveal something entirely unexpected, and Lyra's presence beside him, steady and luminous, provided a subtle reassurance as they continued onward. The spires ahead began to cluster more densely, energy pulses aligning in rhythmic sequences that beckoned them toward an unseen focal point, and Ethan sensed that they were approaching a critical threshold, a moment where curiosity, courage, and trust would converge, the plateau itself alive with expectation, silently urging them to move deeper into its mysteries and embrace the revelations waiting just beyond the next rise. The spires ahead glowed brighter as Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale advanced, the energy pulsing in precise rhythms that resonated through the crystalline plateau, guiding their steps and illuminating details that had been invisible until now. Ethan could feel the vibrations under his boots intensify, a steady cadence that matched the subtle thrum in his chest, and he instinctively slowed to attune to the pulse, sensing the presence of something profound waiting just beyond the next ridge. Lyra hovered lightly beside him, her iridescent form casting shifting prisms of light across the jagged surfaces, and her eyes reflected a mix of awe and recognition, scanning patterns in the crystal that seemed to respond to their presence, as if acknowledging their careful observation. Ethan bent to examine a channel etched deeply into a spire, tracing the energy flow with his fingertips, the light flickering in response to pressure and movement, and Lyra moved closer, her gestures mirroring his own with precision, creating a dialogue of motion and understanding without words. The wind carried faint harmonic vibrations, barely audible yet resonant across the plateau, blending with the hum of the spires and the shimmering pools of liquid that reflected fragments of the glowing architecture around them, forming an intricate symphony of light, sound, and resonance. Every shadow shifted with the undulating pulses, casting abstract patterns that stretched across the ground, and Ethan felt the subtle interplay between motion and reflection, a sense that the plateau itself was alive, observing and guiding them through careful alignment of energy flows. He adjusted the sensor on his pack, noting spikes and dips in the readings that suggested converging energy points ahead, while Lyra's gaze followed the same paths, her eyes narrowing in concentration as she anticipated the rhythm of the next surge, communicating through gesture the importance of timing and precision. As they approached a raised platform at the center of the spire cluster, Ethan felt a quiet tension, a sense of history embedded in the very structure of the crystalline formations, each pulse of light revealing hidden textures and patterns, while Lyra extended a hand, eliciting a soft radiance that intertwined with Ethan's own presence, signaling alignment and cooperation. The plateau seemed to breathe with them, the vibrations underfoot synchronized with their movements, and Ethan felt a momentary clarity as the interaction between human intent and alien energy created a pattern of understanding, anticipation, and cautious revelation, a threshold of comprehension waiting to be crossed. Lyra's eyes met his, reflecting the luminous arches and channels around them, a shared recognition passing silently between them that the next step would unveil the deeper mysteries of the plateau, the energy, and the planet itself, a quiet promise of revelation and understanding that hung in the air like the soft hum of the crystalline structures themselves, patient, expectant, and endlessly inviting. The central spire rose before Ethan Walker and Lyra Vale, taller and more radiant than anything they had encountered, its surface alive with flowing light that pulsed in a rhythm that resonated through the plateau. And Ethan felt his chest tighten with anticipation as he stepped closer, each movement deliberate, grounding himself against the subtle vibrations of energy beneath his boots. Lyra hovered beside him, her form catching every refraction and scattering colors across the crystalline ground, her eyes reflecting the intricate dance of light and energy as she studied the spire with a quiet reverence, acknowledging the significance of this moment without words. Ethan reached out, fingertips brushing the smooth, luminous surface, and a gentle warmth spread through him as the pulses of energy responded, flowing around his hand and up his arm, a tangible connection that seemed to communicate centuries of history embedded within the crystalline structures, a silent understanding of presence, intent, and discovery. Lyra extended her hand as well, and the light intertwined with Ethan's touch, merging the human and alien energy in a delicate interplay that illuminated the spire with intensifying brilliance, casting reflections across the plateau that shimmered in hypnotic patterns, the visual harmony conveying a shared recognition of courage, curiosity, and trust. The hum of the plateau swelled subtly, resonating with the synchronized pulses of the spire and their joined hands, carrying a rhythm that spoke of time, observation, and patient attention to the natural flow of the planet's energies. And Ethan could feel the connection deepen as the energy seemed to bend slightly toward their presence, acknowledging the alignment of focus and intent. The air shimmered with tiny motes of luminescent dust, tracing invisible currents between them, and Ethan inhaled the sharp, clean scent of minerals and ozone, feeling the plateau's silent story brushing against his senses, the history and knowledge embedded in every reflective surface and shifting shadow. Lyra's gaze met his, and for a fleeting instant, the plateau seemed to hold its breath, the surrounding spires glowing with an intensity that conveyed the gravity of their discovery, and Ethan realized that their journey had transformed into a delicate communion with the planet itself, a convergence of understanding and respect that transcended species and circumstance. Step by careful step, they circled the central spire, observing subtle shifts in the energy and reflections, reading a narrative of light and resonance written in a language older than either of them could comprehend, and each moment deepened their shared awareness of the planet's vastness and the fragile beauty of connection. As they finally paused, hands close but not touching the surface, the plateau stretched endlessly around them, shadows and prisms interweaving into a silent tapestry, and Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and peace, a recognition that humanity's capacity for observation, empathy, and courage could coexist with the alien majesty surrounding them, leaving a quiet, open-ended promise of revelations yet to unfold, a final reflection in the luminous eyes of Lyra that seemed to capture both the journey and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead.